Hi, I'm John Brown, and I'm the student that made Clean Kill. Here's my AICE Media CCR. Since my film is a comedy horror, it has twice the amount of cliches and conventions to talk about than in other openings. However, cliches found in comedies and horrors are pretty difficult to avoid when you're trying to replicate the feel and style of these openings. For example, most comedy film openings center around the main characters and illustrating how they interact with the world around them in a typically funny or awkward way, since comedy films traditionally are very character-focused pieces of media, relying on building character more than establishing the plot in the first few minutes of the opening. In horror movies, the opening is meant to build tension and suspense as they work up to one big scare, preying on human anxiety as they tease you with something horrible before fully exposing you to it. The point of horror openings is simply to get the audience on the edge of their seat, dreading a scare for the entire opening before hitting you with a payoff. In Clean Kill, the opening does revolve around the two protagonists, Danny and Martin, and it focuses on establishing their character. However, it doesn't really explore how they're seen by others in this world, and shows no direct interaction with other people besides each other. Typically in comedy openings, the audience is presented the zany protagonist from the view of an outsider in their world, not from their perspective, which is what brings the comedy to the film, watching a weird character acting weirdly and seeing how other people react to this. However, in this opening, the audience doesn't see the duo from any other perspective but from their own. That's why the camera in the first scene is inside the car and not outside of it. We're meant to identify with these characters and laugh with them, not at them, as you so commonly see in films like 21 Jump Street, Elf, and pretty much any Adam Sandler movie. Clean Kill distinguishes itself from other horror media since the opening sequence does almost nothing towards building tension. You follow friends having fun, discussing local news, and having some friendly banter, but there's almost nothing trying to build suspense in the environment. If I were leaning more heavily into horror themes and conventions in this opening, I would change the perspective of the film entirely, from the two friends hanging out to the perspective of the gas station victim. In horror movies, you typically take the point of view of the victim, so you experience the scares with them. However, this opening is shot as if from the perspective of the two buddies, which implies that they are the victims of whatever evil is lurking. The expectation of the audience is subverted when it is revealed that you've actually been watching from the perspective of the murderer without leaning into his point of view overtly, like you see in movies like Halloween. Regarding representation, the main character of the opening, Martin, is a white male who suffers from an implied disorder like OCD. While it isn't overtly stated that he has this mental illness, one can draw parallels to his obsessive cleaning behavior and typical symptoms of OCD. I chose to represent OCD in my opening because I feel it's an often misrepresented illness in media. Usually OCD in movies is represented as a frenzied, neat freak type personality and is very clearly overstated and obvious in the character's performance and behavior, typically illustrated through their arranging of items in order or through rituals that they repeat constantly. It's this representation of individuals with OCD that gives people with OCD in real life bad reputations, since when someone hears OCD, they typically picture the frenzied, neat freaks they see on TV or in movies. In my opening, I chose not to state that Martin has OCD in order to avoid giving the OCD audience an association with methodical serial killers. In real life, OCD typically manifests itself in small tics, like washing hands, which I've shown in the opening. So I figure that presenting a more low-key case of OCD is a healthier way to represent OCD-affected individuals, while not having to resort to advertising my film as the OCD murderer film. I also want to talk a little bit about representation in my setting. The setting illustrated in the opening is a suburban neighborhood, which is a landmark example of privilege, safety, and cleanliness in a residential community. However, what my opening implies is that this clean presentation of a neighborhood can be a facade for darker, grittier happenings. A sentiment that is mirrored in Martin's character, where he presents himself as a very clean, unassuming person, but actually hides murderous intent behind this mask. Now it's time to talk about my target audience. The age range actually overlap for comedy and horror movies, typically centering around the 15 to 25-year-old range. However, for horror movies, the audience is predominantly male, while comedy movies hold equal appeal to both sexes, which can be attributed to their reputation as date movies. So ideally, my target audience would be teenage to young adult males. Most males that fit this age range typically consume media primarily through video games, TV, or movies. According to this study I found, males tend to be more stimulated through visual action, often found in these video games and more violent TV shows than women, who consume podcasts and blog posts at a much higher rate than men do. So you might be wondering how my production engages this audience. Well, first, it grabs their attention with something that most men, especially at this age range, can relate to: having a close friend and having friendly banter with them. But what will make them stay is the promise of more violence coming in the full film. The ending of the opening gives them some powerful visual stimuli to be entertained, while also ensuring that they stay for the full film instead of just leaving. Now, if this film were to be fully made and distributed, I would likely do it through the Vimeo app, since it's easily accessible online, it can include a paywall to profit from the movie, and it has no discernible upload length limit, which is something that is lacking from competitors like Patreon, YouTube, and OnlyFans. Throughout the production of this opening, my skills as an individual creator have been able to grow and develop massively. Before this project, I would not have a research stage in my videos. I would just jump straight into it, and I would end up making really bad generic products that had no genre identity. During the project, I found that researching things such as genre helped with the writing process much more than I had believed previously, leading me to feeling more prepared and professional when working on a new project. And when I went to write something, I would usually just make a very basic outline of events that really didn't add anything to the product, since I would just end up improvising most of the dialogue anyways. And storyboarding? I thought that thing was optional. After this project, I can see the value in extensively planning all aspects of a project before putting in work on it. Writing a script helped me discover a passion as a writer in this format rather than prose, which inspired me to write a play or two on my own. Storyboarding was also important to my learning process, as I've always thought it was kind of an optional thing rather than something that's crucial to pre-production. The production stage, I wouldn't really have one since I didn't have a script, my actors were unprofessional, and I would try to do everything in one day. So the production stage of most of my past projects were very action-packed and ultimately unfruitful. After this project though, I found that the value of a schedule is priceless and how useful it can be at organizing and pacing your project. During this project, it took me 5 days and 2 to 3 hour segments to shoot all of the footage required for the project, and it gave me plenty of time between shooting days to review footage and judge whether I had to reshoot anything or not. Editing. If you read my blogs, you know how I feel about editing. Before this project, I almost never edited my videos heavily. The most I would do is stitch them together with a program, or even send it out for a friend to edit it for me. But now that I've finished this project, I think I'm a little bit more confident and comfortable with my editing style. Not that I enjoy it, but I'm comfortable with it. I don't have to rely on someone else, and I can create a decent product out of the footage that's given to me. You might be thinking, John, you have such a clean final product. Did you change anything? Well, actually, yes, I did. I actually had 2 scenes that I ended up cutting from the final product because they were too redundant, and they kind of pushed the time limit a little bit past what I should have been aiming for. First scene that I had ended up cutting took place inside the gas station after they talk at the gas pump. This scene would have had Martin follow the victim into the store and bathroom and try to fake out the audience, where they are led to believe that Martin is just following a suspect and not staking out a victim. The other one took place within the bathroom, and it would actually show the murder happening as Martin attacks the victim suddenly and precisely. So I ended up cutting these 2 scenes because I felt like they were a little bit redundant and took too much time out of the final run time. The first one I had to cut because it didn't add anything to the story. It was just a little fake out for the audience and didn't progress any of the plot. And I absolutely hate it when they do that in movies, so I said, why would I want that in my movie? And the other one I felt just wasn't necessary. I talked with my professor, and after mulling it over, we came to the conclusion that besides adding some visual fun for the audience, it's not necessary. I felt that it hit a lot harder if you just saw the end product without seeing how he kills. And it leaves a little bit more room open to explore that in the rest of the hypothetical film. Of course, there are also scenes in the final opening that did not really meet what I wanted, but I still liked what the scene was about. So the first one was in the car where the two guys are just sitting around talking. Instead of having the music playing, I was going to have a radio broadcast that was kind of already foreshadowing the fact that there was a serial killer on the loose. But I ended up cutting this because it's redundant with what Danny talks about later, and ultimately I thought it was funnier coming from Danny. I didn't want to have to record a radio broadcast line, so that's why I cut it.
You haven't heard? There's a serial killer on the loose.
Skills-wise, before working on this project, I was essentially just a guy with a camera and weird ideas, and I completely lacked a creative vision and discipline. I just filmed whatever I wanted with no thought or consideration on how to express meaning through ways that weren't just dialogue. The most I would do is write some guidelines on what to say, film with no idea of what shot techniques to use or not really caring about the quality of the product, and then edit it together by just stitching it together in like MS Paint, which is definitely an editing source. However, after working on this project and taking AICE Media as a class, I can safely say that I look upon the creative process way more differently than I used to. I place greater emphasis on planning than anything else, since that planning process can tell me off the bat whether it's an idea I can feasibly pursue. And I actually write full scripts now, for fun. So instead of just winging it before, I actually care about what is said, what it's implying, how it's shot, and I just feel a lot more satisfied with how I produce things rather than just throwing things together in one day. I feel more solid. So some ways that I integrated software into my production was through OpenShot editing, which was my main platform to edit the film. Now, it wasn't perfect, mind you. Towards the end, I had some issues with frames disappearing, but for the most part, it was a very easy platform to work with. It was very simple, and it had everything that I needed, save for a few little tools that I was missing. Another way that I integrated software was through Adobe Premiere, which I used for titles, credits, and fixing the little problems that OpenShot created for me. That's how I fixed the frame issue, and that's how I tried to fix some blurring, but ultimately Premiere also couldn't blur in the way that I wanted to. Now yes, despite finding Premiere a little bit difficult to work with, I got a little bit better at it, and I'm actually using it now to work on my CCR, so everything's a learning experience for me. A way that I integrated hardware into my production was through my phone, the Galaxy S10, which I use to film pretty much every shot that you see in the opening. The camera quality surprised me, but the mic left a little bit to be desired. So I ended up having to borrow a microphone from my friend Wade, who was also working on AICE Media. Thankfully, he lended it to me for a couple of days, more than I should have used it, but it was integral to recording all of the audio and making sure that everything was well. Now, even though it was a little bit weird to work with since I had no previous instruction and we took a little bit of time to work on, it was perfect. So the main way that I integrated online technologies into my project was through Blogger, which was my main hub for documenting and just keeping track of the progress on the project. Similarly, I also use YouTube to upload every draft that I had and send it out to my friends where I could receive some peer criticisms. Another way that I implemented online technologies was through Twitter, which is where I found and contacted Mr. Dr. Alexander, which was my musical producer. To wrap things up, I just want to say that I learned a new respect for screenwriting and planning ahead, and I also learned how to develop my editing skills considerably. Additionally, I strengthened my ability to make a solid creative vision and translate it to something visible and tangible, which is something I've always struggled with. And if I could change anything, I'd probably give myself more time to shoot footage, considering that some of the acting could have been better.
Ain't no way.
And I just want to give myself a little bit more time than just a weekend to edit the video, so I'd also extend my time to edit. But yeah, that was my CCR, and I guess I'll have to see you next year when I join A-level. See ya.